Picture this. The torches flicker against the cold stone walls of a medieval castle. The air smells of damp earth and burning tallow, and in the dim glow a figure emerges, his body twisted, his spine curved grotesquely, his arms shorter than they should be, his gait uneven like a marionette pulled by tangled strings. Whispers echo across the great hall. Some kneel out of loyalty, others recoil in horror. For many in his kingdom, this was not a man at all. This was a demon, a living curse born of God's wrath. But here's the chilling part. He wasn't a demon, he was their king. Tonight, we're stepping into the dark, unsettling story of the monarch whose deformities inspired both terror and superstition, a ruler whose very body became a battleground for myth, politics, and survival. And as you'll see, his story isn't just about his appearance, it's about power, fear, and how societies treat those who are different. Stay with me, because what comes next will change how you think about both history and humanity itself. To understand how a king could be so hated, feared, and mythologized simply for the way he looked, we need to travel back centuries, into a world where medicine was primitive, superstition ruled over science, and physical difference was often interpreted as divine punishment. In this time, rulers were expected to be symbols of strength, health, and vitality. A king wasn't just a political leader, he was supposed to be a physical embodiment of God's will on earth, tall, commanding, and fierce in battle. That was the image of kingship. Now imagine the shock, the scandal, when a future monarch was born so visibly, undeniably deformed. From his first breath, he was a contradiction. To some, proof that God had abandoned the dynasty. To others, evidence of dark sins committed by his bloodline. The child who should have been celebrated as the hope of the kingdom was whispered about as an omen. According to chronicles, the king's birth was anything but ordinary. The midwives gasped at the sight of him. His head appeared too large, his shoulders uneven, and his back arched sharply, as if bent by an invisible hand. Some said he cried with a voice more shriek than wail, a sound that chilled even the most hardened attendants. The rumors spread quickly through the court. This child was no gift from heaven. He was a punishment, a monster sent to haunt the royal line. But here's the tragic truth. This child was not a monster at all. He was a baby born with what modern medicine would likely diagnose as severe scoliosis, perhaps compounded with other congenital conditions. He was human. He was innocent. Yet in a time before science could explain such things, superstition filled the void. And so before he could even walk, the boy was marked not as a child, but as a curse. Imagine being a child and realizing that every glance, every whisper, every silence is about you. Imagine growing up in golden halls where servants flinch at your presence, where playmates are forbidden from touching you, where priests mutter prayers under their breath when you pass. That was his reality. Court records describe how his deformities grew more pronounced as he aged. His walk became more halting, his back more hunched, his stature far shorter than the lords and knights who towered over him. Children of the nobility laughed behind their hands, while his tutors often treated him with thinly veiled disgust. And yet, he was not without sharpness. He possessed a piercing intelligence, a quick wit, and, according to accounts, a temper that could ignite like a spark to dry hay. Many who mocked him soon regretted it, for while his body may have been frail, his tongue was sharp enough to wound. But what he could not fight was the growing mythology around him. By the time he reached adolescence, the whispers had evolved into legends. Some said he had been marked by the devil, others claimed his deformity gave him dark powers, and in the deeply religious society of the Middle Ages, these stories were not harmless gossip, they were dangerous weapons. Now, let's pause here for a moment, because this isn't just the story of one king. This is a story about society itself. In an age where plague could wipe out entire villages overnight, where famine could reduce kingdoms to ash, people sought explanations for suffering, and often they found those explanations in bodies that looked different. The hunchback, the cripple, the child born with a twisted limb. These were not seen as natural variations of humanity. They were seen as omens, punishments, or signs of hidden sin. And so, this king became more than just himself. He became a living symbol of everything his people feared. Death, disease, divine wrath. Is it any wonder then that when he finally took the throne, many whispered not, "Long live the king," but "God save us from him"? His rule would not be remembered for peace. His deformity, his supposed monstrous body, was weaponized against him by enemies both foreign and domestic. Every political failure was tied to his appearance. Every defeat was blamed not on strategy but on his cursed flesh. But here's where the story becomes fascinating and chilling. Despite being branded a demon, despite carrying the weight of hatred and ridicule, this king carved out a place in history that ensured his name would be remembered for centuries. And as we unravel the battles, betrayals, and scandals of his reign, you'll see how a single body, a twisted spine, a crooked form, reshaped an entire kingdom's destiny. So, what happens when a man despised as a monster becomes the most powerful figure in the land? Stay with me, because in part 2, we'll step into his rise to the throne and the dark, bloody path it took to get there. The boy who was mocked as a demon grew up surrounded by whispers, but the crown waited for no one. When his fight there died, the fragile, deformed prince was thrust into the brutal arena of power. Few believed he could ever rule. Many assumed his body would betray him before he even reached adulthood. Yet destiny had other plans. From the moment the crown touched his head, the court divided. Some lords swore loyalty, but many others plotted in shadows, convinced that a king so twisted in form could not possibly be chosen by God. For them, his deformity was proof of weakness, an excuse to challenge his claim. But he was no fool. From behind his crooked frame blazed a mind sharper than the daggers pointed at him. He understood one truth. Survival meant ruthlessness. Early in his reign, rebellion erupted. Noble families, convinced they could topple him easily, rallied soldiers under the banner of restoring God's favor. They whispered that removing the deformed king would cleanse the kingdom of its curse. But when the battlefield called, their assumptions shattered. Though he could not wield a sword with the same grace as others, he wielded strategy like a blade. Hidden beneath armor that struggled to fit his bent shoulders, he commanded from the rear lines, orchestrating maneuvers that left seasoned generals astonished. His enemies expected a cripple. What they found was a calculating predator. The first rebellion ended in blood. The nobles who dared defy him were crushed, their banners burned, their names erased from chronicles. The people watched in stunned silence. The Demon King, as they called him, had proven himself more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Yet the victories only deepened the fear. Stories spread that his deformity gave him unnatural insight, that he could see betrayals before they happened, that his crooked back carried not weakness but demonic power. Priests muttered that no mortal man could win such odds without infernal aid, and so every triumph he claimed became another reason to fear him. The court grew colder, whispers sharper, loyalty more fragile, but he pressed forward, ruling not with charm or grace, but with iron. As the years passed, his body grew weaker, yet his hunger for power only grew stronger. Enemies abroad circled like vultures, sensing opportunity. Allies at home faltered, wondering how long they could stand beneath a king cursed by heaven. But he knew their doubts. He counted on them, and every time a rival thought his body made him vulnerable, he struck with precision. One by one, the threats fell. His crown remained, his throne endured, but behind the victories lay a chilling reality. The more he fought to secure his place, the more he became the very monster they accused him of being. The crown had survived rebellions, but it came at a price. Every victory hardened him, every betrayal carved deeper scars into a soul already burdened by whispers of monstrosity. By the time his reign matured, the boy mocked as a demon had transformed into a ruler, feared by all who stood in his presence. His court was no longer a place of trust. It was a stage of masks, where smiles hid daggers and oaths turned to ash. He trusted few, and even those few never truly knew if they were safe. Councillors vanished overnight, accused of treachery. Noble families who dared to question his decrees found their lands stripped, their heirs executed. The king's body may have been frail, but his rule was iron. His paranoia became law. He demanded absolute loyalty, and in return he gave protection. But those who failed him were punished with merciless swiftness. Torture chambers beneath the castle filled with the cries of dissenters. Their suffering became a warning to anyone who thought weakness lived in the body of their king. And yet, outside the castle walls, the people whispered. They said the king's hunchback bent lower each year because the weight of the souls he had condemned clung to him. They claimed his twisted form grew worse with every betrayal he ordered, as if the devil himself was shaping him into the monster he was accused of being. But there were others, those who believed his cruelty was not demonic, but necessary. In a world of chaos, famine, and foreign enemies, perhaps only a man feared as a demon could keep the kingdom intact. Still, the betrayals never ceased. Ambitious cousins, jealous dukes, foreign monarchs, they all tested him, and each time he crushed them, often in ways so brutal they passed into legend. Tales tell of traitors dragged through city streets, of banners burned as their owners swung from castle walls. But cruelty, like fire, spreads. The very terror that held his kingdom together also pushed allies away. Diplomats hesitated to trust him. Neighboring rulers saw him not as a man to bargain with, but as a beast to contain. Inside his own family, fractures deepened. Relatives who once smiled at him now eyed him with dread. They feared not only his wrath, but the dark stories that surrounded his birth and body. Was he truly cursed? Was their bloodline damned because of him? And so the betrayals struck closer and closer. Trusted knights turned into conspirators. Priests who blessed his reign began to pray for his downfall. Even within his bedchamber, he wondered, would the one who poured his wine slip poison into the cup? The king who once fought to prove he was more than a monster was now living exactly as one, a ruler consumed by fear, rage, and vengeance. But here's the tragedy. Beneath the armor of cruelty, he remained the same boy who had grown up under stares of disgust. A boy who had learned that to survive in a world that called him demon, he must become one. And as betrayal after betrayal struck, he leaned further into the darkness. His reign would forever be remembered not for peace nor prosperity, but for fear. The reign of a king whose twisted body became a mirror for a twisted age. Age was cruel to him, his body already be. Bent and broken since birth, grew weaker with each passing year. The once fiery eyes that had terrified lords now sank into shadows, and his crooked back bent so far that standing upright became an ordeal. But power he refused to let go. Even when pain forced him to remain in chambers for days, he issued commands through trembling hands. Even when courtiers whispered that he was too weak to rule, he clung to the throne as though it were the only thing keeping him alive. And perhaps it was. The betrayals, however, never stopped. Time had not softened the hunger of those who coveted his crown. Rivals circled like wolves, their fangs sharper now that the king appeared vulnerable. Assassination plots thickened the air. Poison became a constant fear. At feasts, he often pushed away untouched plates, convinced that death waited in every bite. His final years were marked by isolation. The court that once trembled before him grew restless, his subjects weary. Many believed his reign cursed the kingdom, that famine and disease were punishments for the demon king. Priests whispered that only his death could restore God's blessing. And then it came. Accounts of his final moments differ. Some say he died alone, racked with pain, his body contorted so severely that even in death he appeared twisted beyond recognition. Others claim that as he lay dying, he cursed the very nobles who abandoned him, promising his spirit would haunt their bloodlines forever. But all agree on one thing: when his body was laid before the people, the sight was so grotesque that gasps filled the chamber. Even in death, his form fueled the myths. Many refused to believe he was merely a man. To them this was proof. He had been a demon walking among them. His burial was swift, almost secretive. Some feared his corpse might rise again. Others simply wanted to erase his reign from memory. Yet history, as it always does, remembered. And what did it remember? A king who had been cursed from birth. A ruler who fought against ridicule and betrayal with iron and blood. A man whose very body became a story, twisted by superstition into something more than human. But behind the myths and the terror was a deeper tragedy. He was never the demon they believed him to be. He was a man born into cruelty, shaped by the hatred of others, and forced to rule through fear because love was never given to him. Centuries later, historians would argue whether his reign was truly monstrous, or whether the real monsters were those who condemned a child for the shape of his bones. So, when we remember him, do we remember the demon, the tyrant, the king, or the child who never had a chance to be anything but feared? History does not give easy answers, but it does give warnings about what happens when fear shapes our vision of others, about how quickly human beings can turn difference into damnation. And if you found this story as haunting as I did, make sure you subscribe, because there are many more forgotten shadows of history waiting to be uncovered. The king was gone, but his shadow lingered. In the decades after his death, chroniclers struggled with how to describe him. Some painted him as a tyrant whose cruelty matched his appearance, a cursed figure who brought only misery to his people. Others, more cautious, admitted his intelligence, his cunning strategies, his undeniable ability to keep a fractured kingdom together when stronger men might have failed. But the stories did not stop at facts. They grew, they twisted, they hardened into legend. Taverns filled with tales of the demon king who struck bargains with the devil. Priests retold his life as a warning to children: disobey and you may be born twisted like him. Poets described him not as a man, but as a beast in human skin. In time his name became less history and more myth. The real man, the child mocked at birth, the ruler who clawed his way through endless betrayal, was buried under centuries of superstition. And yet, behind the myths, one truth refuses to vanish. He was human, a boy who wanted respect, a ruler who wanted survival, a man who never escaped the chains of how others saw him. Modern scholars now ask different questions. Was his deformity truly as severe as the chronicles claimed, or did enemies exaggerate it to fuel propaganda? Were his cruelties exceptional, or simply in line with the brutal politics of his age? Did the world make him into a monster, or did he choose to become one? The answers may never be clear, but his story leaves us with something far more powerful than certainty: a mirror. A mirror reflecting how societies project fear onto difference. A mirror showing how easily myths can consume truth. A mirror warning us that when we judge others by appearance alone, we create demons where none exist. And perhaps the greatest tragedy is this: he could have been remembered as a strategist, a survivor, even a king who held his realm together against impossible odds. But instead he is remembered for his body, not for what he did, but for what he looked like. So the next time you hear the tale of the king so deformed people believed he was a demon, remember, history's monsters are not always born. Sometimes they are made. If you want to uncover more hidden stories like this, make sure to subscribe and stay with us, because history is full of shadows, and we're only just beginning to walk through them. Who wanted survival? A man who never escaped the chains of how others saw him. Modern scholars now ask different questions. Was his deformity truly as severe as the chronicles claimed, or did enemies exaggerate it to fuel propaganda? Were his cruelties exceptional, or simply in line with the brutal politics of his age? Did the world make him into a monster, or did he choose to become one? The answers may never be clear, but his story leaves us with something far more powerful than certainty: a mirror. A mirror reflecting how societies project fear onto Diffie. Rents. A mirror showing how easily myths can consume truth. A mirror warning us that when we judge others by appearance alone, we create demons where none exist. And perhaps the greatest tragedy is this: he could have been remembered as a strategist, a survivor, even a king who held his realm together against impossible odds. But instead, he is remembered for his body, not for what he did, but for what he looked like. So the next time you hear the tale of the king so deformed people believed he was a demon, remember, history's monsters are not always born. Sometimes they are made. If you want to uncover more hidden stories like this, make sure to subscribe and stay with us, because history is full of shadows, and we're only just beginning to walk through them.